I'm president of the Friends of the Library here in Claremont. I used to be the mayor here when we established the library, and so we're glad to have you here. And we're honored to have Dr. Gary Freeze with us this afternoon. Perhaps knows more about Catawba County than anyone else that I know of. Professor at Catawba College, got his PhD from UNC, and Catawba County commissioned him a number of years ago to do a history of Catawba County in black and white. And most of you probably have a copy of these two books here, his first two editions of Catawba County. If you don't have, I'm sure they are available and you can get some. But you look through there and it's amazing how much history there is, and what a great job he's done with the photography and describing and so forth. And of course he's got a third book coming out. Well, he'll talk about here shortly, in a week or two, maybe a month. And very excited about that. I'd like to have a copy of that myself. And he's going to talk about it a little bit. Then during the question and answer period, there'll be more discussion about his new book. And we're starting at 5. We hope to end at 6. And afterwards, we have some refreshments over here. And that's our itinerary. So let you know what's going on. Thanks again for coming, Dr. Freeze.
Thank you. What we didn't say is because it's an hour long, there will be a test. Standard 50-minute college period, so everybody will take notes precisely and we'll have it. I'd like to pay recognition to my former student, Laura Ritchie, who was an early research associate with me on the book. And I owed her at least one public occasion where I thanked her for all the great help that she did. And I also owe her money for babysitting my granddaughter, and we were paying it with a rocking chair, and I took her to Dixie Seating in Stony Point, and they had closed 15 minutes before we arrived. So I've been on a wild goose chase, but there are no geese in Claremont. Let me first pretend that you are not the choir, but you are the people to be converted. In a sense today, I may say a few things that are obvious to you if you are a native. But if you are a newcomer, or if you haven't paid particular attention to all the project that we have been doing, I thought I would take this occasion to tell you a little bit about what you've done to allow me to do this project. So you need to understand this is unique. In the 20 years off and on that I have been doing this, I have yet to find anywhere else in the United States that the people of a community, that means Catawba County, have supported a project to such an extent as you have. And you may not know it, but that includes your money, because in some cases, tax funds were used in the short run to help pay for the project, and then what has happened is that the proceeds from the sales of the book have gone back into a revolving fund. And that's unique too. So to help you understand that, a lady in Salisbury about 10 years ago said, "Why are you doing that over there?" And I said, "They pay me." And she said, "Well, why aren't you going to write a book about Salisbury?" And I told her, "What you pay me." And she hasn't spoken to me since. That may have something to do with what kind of Republicans they are versus Republicans across the river. Or as I like to say as a Democrat in Rowan County, I am an honorary Republican from Rowan County. Now today, I'm going to do several things. First, I'm going to describe again what the project is so that you will understand it. And then I'm going to talk about the topic which was advertised, which was laying by time. And I'm going to link that topic to what makes these books, to my mind, so unusual, if not unique. And then I will tell you particularly about the two events which most of you know about, the Soldiers' Reunion and the Balls Creek Camp meeting. And then about 35 minutes into it, I'll stop, let you ask questions, and then we will go into any category that you might want to talk about, including, if you want me to read it, the 2 or 3 paragraphs on Claremont right after the war. In other words, I can share those. I have read your town minutes, and I may never get to come to Claremont again. But they are quite interesting. They aren't nearly as interesting as me, but that's another topic. Take that as a compliment. I will not take your name in vain when I go to Maine. The Catawbans attempts to do several things which most county histories in North Carolina have never done. The first one is to actually take the story from its colonial beginnings up into contemporary times. And I did that in some ways with the second book, which you have here, which took the story through World War II. Most local histories are pre-1900 histories, and they fundamentally stop when they get to contemporary times. The same is true, by and large, with textbooks on North Carolina, particularly the one you may have had if you went to college at a certain time, by Hugh Leffler. And what I have tried to do is go beyond both that in Catawba County and with my 8th grade textbook, which I am very proud of, actually has chapters since 1972. And so when I finished the first book, I actually was already planning the second book. And we very astutely, with Sidney Halma, who was at that time the director of the County History Museum, we basically plowed the profits and the proceeds from the first book into a contingency fund that funded the second book. And then what the county did was find the funds to allow me to take a 6-month period to actually write the book. And I finished that in 2002. So if you've never seen them, the first book is 1995 and 1996. And then the second book is completed in 2002. Pardon me, I didn't expect that. We'll have to talk to the county manager about that. Oh, I'm sorry, city manager. At any rate, what I wanted to point out to you, just for example, is the second book is basically a summary of 87 years of newspapers, both in Newton and in Hickory, that I and my assistant, Alex Floyd, who was in Newton at the library, read, just to help you understand that. When I finished the second book, I was very tired. And I then, for several years, worked on other projects, and Sidney Halma had other projects he was working on. And about 2008, 2010, I sort of began to try to work on a post-World War II project. And I kind of dittered around and did this and did that. In about 2013, Tom Lundy, our former county manager, said, "When are you going to finish this?" And I made one of the greatest mistakes in my life. I said, "When are you going to pay for it?" Of course, when you say that to Tom Lundy, he might just what? Pay for it. And then I was stuck. Now, through actually the very sound plans of Tom and the county, I was able to do this by taking another lead where I could essentially work on it full time. And then over the last year, year and a half, I have, to the best of my ability, gotten it done. It was quite an odyssey. And the book is at the printer. It is actually being printed in Manitoba. And you will be amused that the name of the printer is Frisian. I'm waiting for my check. And essentially, it will either be back, I was told by Sidney, and I was hoping he'd be here today to confirm, and we'll let our next book come in. It will either be here by the end of this month or the end of next month. And I assume, since that is a union shop, fundamentally they have a month budget, and you're either at the tail end of one month or a tail end of the other. Just to help you understand, that is also a U.S. company, but they actually have a printing plant in Manitoba. So we won't have any notions of NAFTA here today. We'll talk about those another time. So that's the project, in case you didn't know what it was like. And I'm very proud of it, and I'm ready for it to be done, and, and I hope that you will like it. Today's topic is to give you a slice of the book, and to help you understand why I think it took 3 volumes to fundamentally make this book work. And that is what I call laying by time. And some of you know, if you were here and grew up here, that laying by time is a reference to an agrarian time period when farmers in America, particularly, followed a set rhythm for growing their crops and living their lives. And it's really very simple to understand if I kind of go through the cycle of the year. Most people don't remember, perhaps, particularly young people today, that farmers around here, when they grew wheat that they planted in September. They waited for it to come out from under the snow in spring, and they harvested it in June and into July. We grew essentially a winter wheat, not a summer wheat. And that was simply part of the rhythm of agrarian life. And even mid-state meals in Newton, originally in Maiden, essentially depended upon that rhythm. And some of you may have been around when you used to have those huge long lines of trucks in downtown Newton as folks from 50 to 100 miles came and delivered their wheat. That's why you may have memories in your family of threshing times, when the threshers went farm to farm, and the women and the children of the family had to serve the meals and all that. That was all part of Catawba County's rhythm. Iredell's, Burke's, Caldwell's, it was everywhere. What almost killed that rhythm was the fact that industrialization made it cheaper in some places to actually import your flour from Iowa, from perhaps through Chicago, than to grow it yourself. And in fact, for many farmers, particularly farmers to the south of here, that got caught up in the cotton production of the early 20th century, laying by time kind of disappeared. And so one of the aspects of American agrarian life was that these rhythms kind of went away. But they didn't go away in Catawba County. And one of the features, of course, that I find so amazing, and that's in both Volume 2 and the beginning of Volume 3, and I have some pages over here for you to see afterwards, is that Catawba County, more than most places in the Carolinas, and I'm pretending the Carolinas is my universe, kept to this agrarian lifestyle far more strongly than did other places that had, in a sense, sold their soul to cotton. Catawba County had more of a diversified agriculture well past the Second World War. And in fact, the subject of Chapter 3 is the amazing way in which the local folks here combined the programs of the New Deal and created what was an incredibly successful bureaucratized agriculture. And that's a whole section of the chapter. And that is part of what I find so fascinating about this county. And the way to understand it is that in many ways I am a historian of tapping, of a spigot. And I study things that used to flow very continuously, and they tend to turn to a trickle, and in some cases the tap is closed. And in the case of Catawba County, with these traditional rhythms, the tap remains open, or at least relatively warm. And so Catawba Countyans kept these rhythms longer. Everybody let that sink in. In Catawba County, compared to other places, the folks of this county, in all corners of this county, to some degree or another, kept that spigot flowing. So perhaps you have been to the chicken supper, the pot pie supper at Bethel Lutheran Church in Catfish. That is a symbol of old agrarian rhythms. It is the equivalent of what was the Harvest Festival, when farmers had finished all these harvestings and they, in a sense, celebrated. It was known as the Fall Frolic, and I ran into references of that all across the Piedmont, particularly in old, customary neighborhoods, and you still have it. But I can't find it elsewhere. In other words, these are the kind of things that fascinate me that you still have. So laying by time was when two things had occurred in traditional agriculture. The first one was that you had completed the threshing. That in a sense your wheat was bagged up, it was prepared for the winter, it had perhaps been marketed, particularly once you had trucks and automobiles, but fundamentally the wheat season was over, and it would not resume until after you ate chicken pie in the fall. Understand, there's a rhythm to how you, in a sense, punctuated your years, if you will. Okay? The second aspect of laying by is that if you did grow cotton, as did folks extensively in the Sherrills Ford area up into the Falls Creek area, this was the period in August when you finally quit chopping it all the time. When the actual cotton plant itself had gone into the bowl, and it did not any longer matter that you had to pull up or chop off or hoe off the weeds that would choke the plant. The plant was past the period where the weeds would essentially destroy it, and you could stop. Until, of course, you had to face, whenever you decided to do it, the backbreaking task of picking it. And you may not know, but up until the 1940s, late 1940s, Catawba County's school system actually had a laying-by season as well. You actually started school earlier than we remember it being started, and then they took off 2 weeks at the end of August, roughly, varied from year to year, and you got to go pick cotton. School actually stopped, resumed. And most people don't remember, they always sort of remember that it happened after cotton. But I found that wasn't the case for several years. You went to school, then you stopped to do the agrarian chore, and then you came back. This custom is a century old. And at least a memory of it exists here. Now, all of you know what the memory of it is, but you may not have associated it with this annual rhythm. And that's the 2 events that occur this week. One is Soldiers' Reunion, which is Soldiers' Reunion week now, but it used to be a day. Remember the famous 3rd Thursday in August. And the second one is, as all of you know, Balls Creek. Okay? And remember, all Catawbans are distinguished by 2 things. They either live in Hickory and don't go to Soldiers' Reunion, or they either tent or they don't tent. Right? Basically, you can divide all Catawbans pretty much into those very simplistic categories. I have to tell you a story. I was at Balls Creek last night. I stopped over on my way home from Soldiers' Reunion. And Robert Eads, the former county attorney who did the ceremonies last night, someone, I won't mention him, you may be kin to him, walked in the middle of the announcements, and Robert stopped, his mouth dropped, and said, "I'm sorry, folks, I've never seen so-and-so at camp meeting. Hell must have frozen over." Those Methodists took that up. Robert really was affected. He was like, "Why are you here?" So, and then he said, "See, he hadn't been here in years. That's what happens to you when you move to Hickory." Let us start with Soldiers' Reunion. Now, I am assuming that most of you know what happens there. In other words, since the late 19th century, particularly by the time of the First World War, on that 3rd Thursday in August, the county of Catawba, spearheaded, of course, by the city of Newton, paid honor to its veterans. And that is essentially what does happen. It still happened yesterday. It has happened every year that they have done it. Now, truthfully, it did begin as an event that commemorated the lost cause. So if you've been at all involved with the current controversies over the event, it is an undeniable fact that it was originally an homage to Civil War veterans. Why should we deny that? That's part of our heritage, that's part of our story. But as I have told everyone who wants to ask me, the Soldiers' Reunion, like everything else, has evolved through time. And since World War I, it has been a commemoration of all veterans of all wars to thank them both for their service and to celebrate the fact that they defend our community. Now, for all the faults and all the strengths of the Soldiers' Reunion, it has never lost that second character. It retains it. Now, there's all kinds of debates you could have about whether that's appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as history is concerned, we have every means of saying this is a tradition which is broad and deep. Now, what are you commemorating? Well, what you're commemorating even today with Soldiers' Reunion is what was called the Old Militia Rally. Now, some of you may have heard about it. At least once a year, sometimes twice a year, throughout every county in North Carolina, people who belonged to militia companies, who had come together in the spring, often to list their taxes. I don't know if you knew this, but they often combined tax listing with militia drill because they assumed that they could get everyone in one place at one time. And actually, when our county was formed, they actually organized tax paying, not by townships, they do not exist yet, but by what were called beats, a play upon beat the drum, okay? And you came together to list your taxes. I don't know when you actually paid them, but you at least listed them, and then you went through the muster, etc. The second muster was generally in August. Why? Because you had hit laying-by time, and farmers could afford a day away from the cows, away from the fields, and come. And what most people don't know is that at least until the Civil War, state political elections occurred in August. Why don't you let that sink in? So you voted for governor, you voted for the legislature in August. And then you had to come back to wherever your polling place was to actually vote for federal elections every other year. So Congress, the president, etc. were separate, even though you might have had the election the same year for local offices. All of this occurred, the local stuff, the militia duty, the rally, the sense of a festival, all occurs at some point in August. Now I've never been able to confirm that it was always the third Thursday. I'm still not 100% sure how they figured that out. Sylvia Ray tells me essentially that was Fanny Ransom, who was one of the key organizers of the Soldiers Reunion. She came up with that, but I'm still unclear exactly what it came out, how it came out. So what happened in these old rallies in these days? Well, folks came. They brought their families. And you did everything. You did horse trading. You did perhaps potential mating, courtships. I assume deals were struck. I assume deals were paid for. People sold, according to George Yoder, ginger cakes on the street. And maybe they even stayed sober enough to march around. Hard to know. In case you wonder about your ancestors, in 1863, when, and I'll put it in volume 1, when the Confederacy started taxing everything that could move, and they taxed a liquor still, 1 in 7 Catawbans in the state. I want you to let that sink in. 1 in 7. Well, it was just capital in the bank, right? Liquor doesn't rot. It may burn, but it doesn't rot. And so in some ways, it was simply a way of capital investment. Now, consumption habits, I'm not sure I know enough about. So, laid-by time is the inspiration for the Soldiers Reunion. It connects to the lost cause, and what it essentially does is keep, ready? It keeps an agrarian focus upon a national commemoration. Remember, Memorial Day is an inconvenient holiday for most folks in most tradition, right? When it occurred. And you will remember the problem you also have in May is that was also Confederate Memorial Day. So you had, at least for a while, 2 Memorial Days in a month when everything was calm, school was still in, you understand, everyone was still working. Remember that vacation was traditionally the July 4th week. And so the idea that you would get together in August was itself as deep as the traditions that the Catawbans had. And all the elements are there. Think about it. Is not Miss Reunion, in all its many manifestations, another aspect of courtship? In a sense, right? And is not the parade the equivalent of a muster? So if you were there yesterday and you saw the sons of Confederate veterans fire off the muskets, that actually is historically logical. And if you look through the crowd and you saw the diversity of classes and society and different kinds of people and different kinds of families, that would have been there in 1851 as well. All the elements. Now the carnival is perhaps an industrialization of layered over, but I am sure that that simply replaced what? The horse races, right? The foot races, the various ways in which people essentially prove their worth. Is not carnival going in part, hey honey, I can knock that thing with the higher, it's the old Popeye cartoon, isn't it? You're showing off. And we still do that. Now you need to understand, there's nowhere else in North Carolina that's going on. The only thing that compares to the Soldiers Reunion is the Faith 4th of July parade. And my assistant, Miss Ritchie, grew up in Faith. And it is an actual adaptation. It started right after World War II. The veterans groups, particularly the American Legion, decided they would use the week of the 4th because people were what? Home. And they would, in a sense, adapt the idea. They have a carnival, they have a parade, they have contests, they have beauty pageants. Now they have, what's it called, Laura? Faith Idol. They imitate American Idol. Sometimes they sort of imitate it, sometimes they don't. But at any rate, it is a week-long festival that in many ways is the same. Now, what do the two have in common? Well, there are two very solid German counties in this state. Can you name them? Catawba and Claremont. And in other words, what I think is going on goes even deeper than the laying by times. I think there is an element, a small element, of the old Germanic street festival in our county. And we somehow subconsciously still get a charge from it. And I'll let you think about that. I'm open to being challenged on that. But my essential argument is, show me in the rest of the state what all those Scotch, Irish, and English do. And then we'll have the same thing. So is it that we're really are just in a sort of germ-like way continuing to celebrate our European heritage? And yes, I know people from all over the county who aren't German come, but if you look very closely as to what's going on there, it has very close parallels. Now, speaking of the English, let us turn in our remaining 10 minutes to Falls Creek. So this one's easier. This one's very easy to analyze. I have published articles about not only Falls Creek, but its cousin, Rock Springs. If you don't know, Rock Springs is the guys who have the camp meeting but they don't paint. They are more pure, at least that's what they tell me. You know, you can go to Falls Creek and get a kind of migraine from the color variations, which I support. Now, what's Falls Creek from our point? Well, first, it fits the laying by time, doesn't it? It is the time when farmers could get away from all this and come and worship and gather for an extended weekend. You need to remember, when they founded this thing, it was not 2 weeks long. If they had done that, all their cows would have exploded while they were on. And they would have had to have a pen. There is no real tradition of bringing more than one cow along. I've checked that very sincerely, and think about it, they would have run out of all this ham biscuits. So originally, what you had in the agrarian days was a long weekend. Best estimate I have is you arrived on Thursday, you left on Monday. And thousands came. Remember that Falls Creek, which was established in 1853, was almost like it was born full-blown from Rock Springs. Rock Springs in the 1840s could attract as many as 10,000 people a weekend. It was considered at one point to be the second largest town in North Carolina 1 week a year. You don't know, Wilmington was the largest. And for reasons that nobody at Rock Springs will agree with me on, and everyone at Falls Creek will tell me to say whatever I wish, I think that Falls Creek was established because of some difficulties with the establishment of Catawba County, a little bit of resentment in Lincoln County, and the obvious fact that it was so big it could, in a sense, replicate itself. Now, the weirdest thing about all this with agrarianism is that if you go and you look at the old Yoder map, the old original map we have of Catawba County, and you kind of extrapolate it down into Lincoln County, there is something very fascinating. Now, did they know that? Was that God's will? Am I really high when I look at the map? I don't know the answer. But it is a fascination to me, and it's all along. And you see, you must understand something if you've not paid attention. Nowhere else in the United States has traditional Methodism survived as strongly as from here to Denver. Remember, it isn't just that there's Falls Creek and Rock Springs. There are three. I do this at Catawba, and some students can't tell the difference there. She could. I'm in trouble now. I'll have to find it. All right? There are 3 African American Browns. I don't know if you knew that. There is Mackenzie Chapel, there is Mott's Grove, and there is the most famous, which is Tucker's Grove. Tucker's Grove, if you've never been by it, is an amazing sight to see. And that too is phenomenal. Nowhere else in the United States do you have a legacy of freedmen. And remember, all those grounds were established by people who had been slaves to the very Methodists that they had gone to. And they're still there too. I was part of a national study group of the Methodist Church about 15 years ago at Duke University. We met 1 week in a year and we all just kind of talked. I was very blessed to get to do that, especially since I was a Lutheran. I don't know what they were thinking, but I had studied these camp meetings and they included me. And there's nowhere else. Now folks in Alabama have camp meetings. There's a famous one in Georgia. There are 2 in South Carolina. The most famous in the north is at Martha's Vineyard. If you want to Google it tonight, type in Martha's Vineyard Campground, and you will be amazed. It looks like a gingerbread village. It does not look like Falls Creek at all. We have this secret idea that some year we're going to bring them down here, and they're all going to die of shock when they get the dandies. And then we're going to say, can we come up with you? And things. But essentially, the great mystery to me is why are these places there? Now, camp meeting for Methodists is a phenomena of something that goes back to English history at the time of the Wesleys. Remember, there was a Charles who was the hymn writer. I'm sorry, going backwards. John was the preacher, Charles was the hymn writer. And there were open field meetings in England about the time before, about 1730. And they became extremely popular as a way to get out of the cities and kind of have some vacation. And they would last about a weekend until you had to go back to work. And what developed, of course, is that you would camp. And that's where camp meeting comes from. And some of you may know that Rock Springs dates to the 1790s. And one of the very first Methodists, in a sense, came there and helped establish it. If you don't know, particularly the Rock Springs people and some of the Balls Creek people are what I call legacy Methodists. Well, I guess what that is. That means they go back to the first generation. And if you go back into the 19th century, far more than do Baptists, well, Presbyterians are a little different, but far more than Baptists, Methodists trace their spiritual legacy. They would talk about who among them went the furthest back. Very odd. Nobody's studied it, but I run into it every once in a while. And these folks, they're legacy Methodists. And so what they are English people. These are not Germans. I know there are some Sigmunds there. But nevertheless, these are not Germans. These are people who come out of the English traditions of the agrarian cycle as well. And so Balls Creek became a second chapter, if you will, of how Catawbans very peculiarly kept to these rhythms, kept to these ideas. Now, as all of you know, I hope, if you live here, a camp meeting now lasts more than a week. Some people arrive 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. Some people stay through Labor Day. Of course, Balls Creek now has air conditioning and other amenities, and all the people at Rock Springs look down their nose at those, the wusses. They can't come out and sit in the heat like the rest of us. And essentially, this is old. Why do these people do this? If you've never done it, take an out-of-town relative to go see these places. And I've done it for my in-laws from Chicago, and I wished I had tape. Why does anyone come here? And remember, all Catawbans either do this or don't. My cousin Margaret is here, and her cousin, my mother, her cousin, she was not a tenor. She was a very Lutheran, pious person, and she thought that Methodism was untidy. It was untidy. My dad, who came out of the Methodist tradition, he would take, I first went to Balls Creek in 1959. My mother didn't go along. And something that is very deep is there. Now, if you were all a bunch of historians, you're all far too good looking to be historians. But if you were all sitting here as historians, I'd start rattling on about, you ready? It's a big word, okay? This is residual Jeffersonian atavistic behavior. Everybody got that down? That'll be on the test. Anybody know what atavistic means? It means that you make sense of the present by the rules of the past. And you're always looking backward to make sense of stuff. If you're a critic, for example, of not mainstream Islam, but of radical Islam, in fact, many aspects of radical Islam is atavistic. In other words, in its crudest form, radical Muslims want to take us back to the 15th century. When you go to Balls Creek, those folks don't know it, but they're imitating the 18th century. Think about it. They're imitating it. That doesn't make them backward. Why? Because they're doing something that if you've ever been and you felt it, has never gone away. It is to me a sacred ground. I just find it amazing when these folks come there. Why? Well, if you never paid attention, they truly vacate. Now this leads to all kinds of drum jokes, so we won't go there in case you're a drum. All right? But all those folks come there, and guess what they do generally? Nothing. I love taking people from cities when it's happening. Where's their Bibles? So I turned to them and said, they don't need Bibles. They predate the Bible. I had one guy actually believe that. I feel it. But they don't. See, if you watch a camp meeting today on TV, what are they doing? They're watching the screen like it's the basketball game. And God said in the 4th chapter of Genesis, and you write it off down. That's camp meeting? No, they go and sit there, right? So last night I walked around and they're all sitting there and they not me. I don't even think they know I'm there. And why? Well, any mystical tradition must vacate the mind in order for the sacred to enter in. So if you ever go there and you think, why do you sit there in shacks with no amenities and you don't cook, you just eat the same things over and over again, and you say, I do this because my daddy did it, my granddaddy did it, etc., that's exactly the point. Why? It's died everywhere else, because we live in a world where nobody can sit around and do what? Nothing. Nothing. And the fact that they do nothing is what everything's about there. I've watched it at Rock Springs. I have not gone to the African Americans. I cannot tell you that they're exactly the same tradition. It generally is polite not to study them unless they invite you. And, for example, Kevin Cherry, who is now the head of Archives and History and also State Parks, is a Rock Springs person. And he loves to take Raleigh people there. It's just fascinating to hear stories. But he will go to Tucker's Grove. But his father told him when he was a teenager, you may go to Tucker's Grove, and you may talk to everyone, you may be polite, but you don't sit down until they invite you to. Because it's their sacred ground, and therefore you are not to violate. That's deep. See? And the mystery for us, you, I don't live here, okay? The mystery, why? Why does the spigot still flow so strongly? Why do you go to a soldiers' reunion that anyone who's a liberal, I'm waiting for Rachel Maddow to show up, would say this is an antiquated custom by an antiquated group that pursues antiquated values? And you know what? They're right. And that's the mystery of it. Understand? I'm not being critical of it. I'm trying to understand. And you go to Balls Creek, where Christianity has become high-tech, hasn't it? Hasn't it? Every church has a family worship center that looks like a mall, right? Right? And evangelism in the mega churches, you know, you might as well live in your own village. And they go there and they sit in sawdust if they're a purist. Now, I don't personally think you ruined it with air conditioning. It's a different experience. You know, you sweat a little bit. See? And yet, Catawba is still doing it. And the things that have come and gone, I bet you didn't know it, since it will be in the new book, for a while, Soldiers' Reunion was competed with Hickory with something they called Armed Services Day, and they had a parade. It didn't last. Hickory always came up with ideas of its own to compete with all this, but they don't last. Only the two things in the country, one I argue is German, the other I argue is English. In other words, Western Catawba, Eastern Catawba, they have never given up that Jeffersonian atavism. And it's just to help you understand, to finish, and then we'll get right on question time. Up until recently, only Methodists could preach. Up until recently, there had only been one funeral in the entire history of the campground, on the campground itself. Up until recently, there had been fewer than 3 weddings. You didn't go to get married, because marriage is not vacated. You didn't go there for the rituals of birth and death. You don't get baptized there. You don't get buried there. You go there to leave your life alone for a while and become something you are not otherwise. And that's why it's so beautiful. That's why it's so amazing. And why do you still have it and everyone else gave it up? Think about that. And why do you have Soldier Reunion? What I consider to be a true community commemoration of the long history that we must defend our honor and our liberties, regardless of our foibles, regardless of our prejudices. And every August when you have time, you go there and you say, yeah, I get it. Because what fascinated me yesterday, and remember some of you know it was about to be controversial, is I walked around and I looked at everyone, and everyone still was tuned in, regardless of their color, regardless of their class. In fact, I hadn't seen so many people smoking cigarettes in 10 years. That's fascinating. Talk about atavism, all right? And it was just there. So I'll end at this point. Last questions. We've got 20 minutes. I promise you I will still tell you all about the policeman in Claremont. Yes?
Dr. Freeze, I know that there was some tension about the parade yesterday, but was there tension in years gone by or only since the problem in Charleston?
I don't actually know the answer in relation to Charleston, okay? Soldiers Reunion, it is like everything else. Your local community pulses in and out based upon the stresses from outside. So let me tell you the story first from Rock Springs, because it's good. So Rock Springs almost died in the 1970s because hippies thought it was too cool and they came and messed it up. And I was told that the low point came, I'm still not sure what her name was, but she was a stripper from Wilkinson Boulevard. And she came up and parked outside it and performed and got away with it. 10 years later, Reagan had changed that, and conservatism had brought it back. If you look at all these and you read about it, all you ever hear is it's dying. You know why? Because it's hard to keep this alive. Think about that. We don't live in a world that supports these values. And I'm not talking about conservatism, because I don't really know if you know what you're conservative. But there's something that Catawbans have done that I have tried for 20 years to get a handle on. And the best I've ever gotten is the tap still flows. And the mystery to me is not that you do it. The mystery to me is that everyone else does it. So you see in the parade the elements of how community persists. So let's say you're a critic of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, okay? You know, one of the funniest critics is that they wouldn't have ever been that healthy looking. And, you know, in the actual war. And at the same time, down the road came the Fred T. Ford Band, and a lady from whose heritage is Asian was their drum master, was their leader. You know, beautiful girl, beautiful girl. And so what you see when you see these festivals is what you used to see in traditional society, and you saw in medieval fairs. You saw the best of a community, and you saw the what? And in many ways, what we're not allowed to do today, on both sides, I'm not even being partisan, okay? We're not allowed to be that. We're not allowed to, as I am, a very leftist person who respects the Sons of Confederate Veterans because I understand things they do. I may not agree with everything they do, but I understand what it is they want to keep alive in their heart. And we still do that, sometimes clumsily, sometimes badly. You know, I am not a Baptist, but yet last night, Olivet Baptist was there to preach and sing, and they sang like Baptist, and it felt pretty good, but it wasn't a Methodist hymn. It wasn't what we sang last year, you see. So, I'll tell you what the thing that will kill it all is, year-round school. I will tell you that the end of these rhythms will come when we no longer keep the agrarian school system. Now, it almost killed Falls Creek. You remember for a while the state started everything in early August, you see, and that will hurt, particularly camp meeting, and I don't know the impact on soldiers meeting, you see. Now, here's the other thing that I'm hopeful for. When you saw these things seem to decline, it was the absence of young people. So regardless of their politics, their class, their economic status, what I saw yesterday in both of these events was youth participation. So for whatever reason, in a world where they're all sitting there doing Pokemon, right? And there were actually kids doing Pokemon Go in Court Square during the parade. You see, they're still there. So in a world where they don't pay attention to what we think's sacred, why they come? Other than the crowd, why do they come? Maybe one or two, sure. All those things. Does that help? I think the mystery is why you still do it as well as you did. And take that as a positive. Yes, sir?
Did Catawba County have many Southern Unionists?
I can count about a handful, but guess where they were? And I get in trouble if I say this in the wrong part of the county. They were at Falls Creek. So you need to understand this. The home of the Republican Party in this county was actually a unionist base. So everybody needs to remind themselves that the Republican Party has recently been two rivers that merged. One was the old unionist of the 1880s. They were the Behringers. They were the Sigmas. In fact, in the 1890s and early 1900s, camp meeting was very partisan. It was a Republican government, and Soldiers' Reunion was openly a Democratic government. Now, they tended over the 20th century to paper that over. But Gene Sigmund told me that even as late as the late 1940s, they still felt that. Now, that's morphed. You know, you have to understand that significant numbers of Tea Partiers come from places that used to vote for Democrats. So, for example, Claremont Township used to be 2-1 Democratic, year after year, 2-1.
What's this place?
Claremont Township is the township clerk. Okay. So you need to understand lots of things morph in America, and original ideas have new strands and new links. Does that help? I think I helped you. Yes.
Can you talk a little more about kind of religious diversity? When you talked about the Methodists,
You mean in the
specifically
county?
In the county,
Oh, sure.
specifically, and I'm thinking even before, you mentioned Methodist 1790, Rock Springs.
Oh, that's easy, sure.
Before, my family's German Lutheran, been here since
Remember that
17
Catawba County is distinguished by the fact that they're the only place where Lutherans act like Baptists. They get mad at the pastor and they move across the road and build a new church.
Including Methodists and
Yes.
some cases.
Yeah, that goes over really well in Orlando. Huh? Two strands of people dominated the migrations here. The first one were the Germans, and they essentially dominate in what is an arc that goes from Lookout Shoals, roughly, all the way down to Vail. What is most interesting is that through time, the folks who lived to the north of Claremont were subject to a variety of Lutheran synods who came in from elsewhere, particularly if you are a Missouri Synod. Missouri Synod folks tended to have success north of what is Claremont and hardly find any success to the south of I still don't understand that. So if you understand that Missouri Synod folks, particularly folks at Conover, at Concordia, for example, are so strong in the county, they're geographically concentrated. We'll call them LCA types, because that's the label that may make sense to you, tended to be concentrated in the western bound of the county and included most of the Lutherans who came into Hickory, but mostly were strongest down what used to be called Jacob's Ford. But what you must understand is that although there were lots of Lutherans, at various times they were adherents to 5 different synods. And that's like saying the difference between a Free Will Baptist and a Convention Baptist and a Primitive Baptist, and I don't want to get into that because you'll have 3 hours. But Lutherans dominated this county. So when you think of the core of this county, it is a Lutheran county. And then there is the other Catawba, and that's Falls Creek. And Methodism, if you look traditionally, and there's a map in the first book, if you look traditionally, it's all clustered around Falls Creek. And then the black folks who set up their own Methodist churches cluster much in the same eastern section. You then have a third layer of Baptist, and almost invariably the Baptists were down on the southern line. And that's why Baptists concentrate around Maiden, Mount Rahama being the first church. What you don't have is Presbyterians. Instead, you have a layer of what becomes the United Church of Christ, and 50% of them are shooters. And 50% of them are kin to shooters. So what you have in this county from the big view is that you have all these Lutherans who make up the masses, and you have this layer of cream that the Shufords and their relatives dominate. Because this is a Calvinist county without knowing it. The Shufords and their relationships, and I've studied it through Hickory and how they all intermarry, they in a sense are the driving force that leads to industrialization. And Lutherans are participants. I'm not being critical of Lutherans at all, but they weren't necessarily the initiators. By definition then, Methodists were the resistors. They're the ones who remain the agrarian to the longest. Is that how that makes sense? And unlike many counties in North Carolina, you don't have a Baptist dominance except around Maiden. Does that help? Yes. So you're very different. If I were telling you this about Iredell, it doesn't even sound the same. If I was doing Rowan, it would be modestly similar, but I have to talk about all those Episcopalians.
So some of the other groups are kind of Anglican.
They're enough to me to talk about.
Presbyterians came in later.
Yeah, they come. So what?
Anglicans not much.
Yeah. Yeah. Because as far as the big story is concerned, they don't influence.
Right.
You know, and I mean, we have diversity today. Everything's here. You know.
No Quakers either.
I've never met a Quaker in the history of this county that I can remember.
Yeah.
If you find one, I'll be happy to know about it.
Yeah.
You say.
Did you find
Yes.
that there are a lot of Presbyterians in Caldwell County?
I've never studied Caldwell County. So I'm going to believe you and say yes. I do know that Lenore was very much influenced by the Presbyterian Synod, Davenport College, etc. And Jesse Raymond, who lived in Lenore, was the founder of the Presbyterian Church in Newton. But you see, the oddity of that was that the Presbyterians in Newton, the principal member was the second president of Catawba College was a Northern Presbyterian. And his wife was really the catalyst to establish the first church in Newton. And it's an anomaly. Now, Hickory is full of so many groups, you can't call anything an anomaly. But the Presbyterians in Newton, as influential and as wonderful as they are, they don't fit any of the patterns I study otherwise.
Because
I've always told Tom Warlick he never makes any sense. I'm sorry, say again, sir.
Say people that are Presbyterians in the north,
Mm-hmm.
they're by large from Scotland and Ireland.
Oh, yes, this is ultra
Okay,
Scott.
And then the Lutherans are primarily from Germany.
From the Rhine River, that's correct.
So you take the religious climate in Europe
Yes,
and it transfers to here.
That's
because of
correct.
migration.
and I've just described Rowan County more than here. Meaning, if you want to see how everybody gets mad. Yes, sir, Mr.
Dr. Perry, does Freemasonry kind of?
Oh, you got me. I'm going to hide. I have never adequately studied it. Let me tell you why. This is a public project. no matter how I would slice and dice that is a controversial subject to some people. And I'm going to confess for the very first time in 20 years, I intentionally ignored that. Intentionally.
But it seems.
Now, probably not to my scholarly reputation,
Yeah.
but I just simply realized I can't quite figure it out.
I just
So,
wondered if
I'm open to anyone's
it may just be
interpretation.
trickling.
I
hanging
wished
on
I
to that.
knew the answer. Yeah. I
You
wished
saying
I
you
knew.
can't figure out masonry?
Well, I hadn't tried. Well, you don't exactly walk into their halls and they have all their letters and records right waiting for you to go ahead and count.
No, I mean, it's all public, it's an organization.
Oh, that is, but what do I do with it? Sure,
It's an organization with secrets, it's not a secret organization.
that's correct.
It has nothing to do with.
Oh, and I don't care what they do, I want to know what the, his question is their impact on the county. Isn't that what your question was? I don't know that answer. I can't answer that one. I do know, and they're my heroes, when Hickory tore down downtown, which when you read the book, I do not look at favorably, the Masons opposed it vigorously.
The downtown, the hotel history or?
Oh, the whole thing.
The whole thing.
They basically tore Hickory down. And I don't think they've still rebuilt it yet. I mean, if we had the 62 buildings that were in downtown Hickory they demolished, it would be astonishing what we could do with urban renewal today.
You know, they're really still upset that the county seats in Newton.
Oh, that's a whole nother story.
And,
Well, if
most
you
of them up
want,
there,
I
they
could
live
blame
there
that
don't
on
know.
Masons. Would you like that? I could blame that on Masons. Would you like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone knows, of course, if you haven't paid attention, the actual center of the county, which the county was bound to do, would have put the county seat in Concord. And that, of course, has led to residual jokes and hostilities as late as, and you will read about it in chapter 6, the famous annexation wars. Some of you will remember Ed Robinette, and I have compared that to World War I and the battlefront. You know, Hickory got the tanks in line. We're going to protect that hospital parking lot to our dying day. And Conover, of course, was the great imperialism of empty fields. It's a great story. I love it. Yes. Yeah.
Before we run out of time.
Oh, yeah, we're about to
your
run.
new book in Winston.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Yes.
I have selected early pages of the book, if you would like to look. They include some of Balls Creek. I did not bring Soldiers Reunion because I picked up the wrong file. I'm very sorry. But essentially, this is what the style of the book will look like. It has been finessed a little. All I can tell you to do is that once it gets here, Sylvia Ray will have it written up in every publication she can find, probably from here to Moscow. And we this because I have lied to that man more than anyone else in my life. How's the book coming? Have you finished the chapter? Oh yeah, I'll get to you soon. I counted up. I tried to figure out one day how many times I stared him in the face and bold-facedly lied, and I'm somewhere around 75. And he always knew, you know. But see, I don't live here. Think about it. Thank you all for coming. I'll stick around as long as you want.
I'm sure he'll answer any of your questions afterwards if you want to come and talk to him personally. We have refreshments over here, so come up
If I don't know the answer, I'll make it up.
and thanks again for coming out, Charlie.
Dr. Priest, is this the final book you're going to do?
Well, I do plan to live till 130. But I really need to pass this on. I mean, I will tell you the peril here. There's folks still alive I wrote about. Now, I was respectful to everyone. I will tell you that the only thing that I truly sort of lost my respect for was Hickory in the 1960s. I do not think was an exemplary behaviors. But at the same time, the rest of Catawba County, on both sides, did. You will see very brave people who went to Vietnam. The most interesting person to me in this third book is the agriculture teacher at Catawba Rosenwald. He was nationally famous. He needs to be on the tip of our tongues. To finish this, whoever asked me about Soldiers Reunion, I have a solution for this that fits all our projects and all our values. There was a man you'll learn about named Willie Hill. He was an African American from Brown's Chapel Church. He was a hero of the Korean War. He gave his life. He was the first Catawban to die. He deserves a statue in the courthouse lawn. If you put him up, we have now commemorated every war we fought in except Mexico. How much more heritage can you be fair about than to commemorate every war? And I've been telling every county commissioner who won't listen to me the same thing as students. But I won't put names.
Dr. Freeze?
Yes.
How long is the article about the policeman in Claremont?
Oh, I forgot. Oh, I can do a paragraph.
Thank
Do I get to do Maiden too? Because they're a lot
you.
funny.
Please, yeah.
Do you mind? You folks,
No.
you both right? I gotta take the bifocals off. I can't see. I'm very proud of this section, and I do it both before 1960 and after. It is in the chapter on democracy, and I have a chapter where I pay tribute to post-war democracy. It's called The Evolution of Municipality in the Smaller Towns. Not Newton, not Hickory. I'll let you figure the rest out. The modern needs of municipality were sometimes new and different for the smaller towns in the county. Through the first half of the century, Maiden was the largest of these small burgs, and I tell about the population. All the smaller towns had simple but similar configurations, and I talked about how Maiden and Claremont looked very similar at certain times. Then I go to Conover. Conover had to make the leap from a village to a sizable small town. Much of its work was still rooted in citizen activism. And I go on to talk about the fact that I didn't know this, but until 1953, Conover held an annual town meeting, like it was New England. Now, I think the reason for that is the influence of the Missouri Synod, because those pastors all came from St. Louis, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Conover was acting like the North. And it eventually got rid of it. What they do in that meeting, they determined who their candidates were. They literally held a city convention. I wish they still did. I wish all of us did. So that, I go on to talk about that. And then I talk about the growth and how they have to do it. I'm to Claremont. Claremont tackled a host of issues associated with modernization of its services right after the war. By 1947, no one could turn on the fire hydrants unless they were an official or had the town's permission. Now, you notice what I'm saying? Before 1947, what? We turn them on. Okay? Attempts were made to eradicate rats and round up stray dogs. The first stoplight was erected at the corner of Depot and Highway 6470 at the corner where Hewitt's store stood. Quote, after a general discussion for improvements in the town in 1949, parking spaces were paved along the two main streets. The town decided, quote, to turn off the stoplight at 9 o'clock. End quote. The same year, the board began to pay more attention to the volunteer fire department, which had been organized right before the Second World War. By the end of the Korean War, the town had, quote, begun to erect street markers and banned outside toilets. That's 1953. Now, in case you didn't know, Conover had no street signs in 1949. And in fact, most of the streets had no names. And they sent out old Mrs. Eisenhower, Stein's mother, and she named streets. And of course, if she said the street was named that way, you weren't going to fight Mrs. Eisenhower. Because she managed the cemetery. And my God, you weren't going to be buried in Conover without Mrs. Eisenhower. Stein doesn't believe me. Like Catawba, the town, Claremont struggled to keep its wells adequate enough to provide for the growing water needs of its families and factories. In 1955, it successfully got citizens to pass a sewer bond issue to work on sanitation. The second traffic light came in 1956. It was at Lookout Street. And the town established a rescue squad in 1959. And by the way, in the book, there's Mrs. Eisenhower. You turn the page and you can't escape. Yeah. And I go on and talk a little bit more. And I'm going to tell you about the deputy. I'm going to let him go nameless for the moment. But I have to show you